Okay, so today we're going to look at what I think is one of the biggest bargains in hi-fi right now. It's the K11 R2R from FiiO, and it's a bargain because it's a DAC and a headphone amplifier, and also because it sells for 179 euros and roughly 170 US dollars. Now, there's nothing too magical about that feature set and that price, but this DAC sounds quite a bit different from what we normally hear from DACs selling for under 500 bucks. And we are going to look at the little FiiO with music you might read about in Mojo magazine or over at Resident Advisor.
This episode is brought to you by Bowers Wilkins, makers of the PI8 True Wireless IEM. Click the link in the show notes for more information.
Okay, so two of the most popular affordable audio products of the last few years are the WiiM Ultra DAC and the Eversolo DMP A6. Now, these streaming DACs feature well above average software smarts. So they offer touchscreen operation, they offer very broad streaming protocol support, they offer bass management and room compensation. But their DAC hardware, I think, is so-so. It's fine, it's average. And the Ultra and the DMP A6 don't stray too far from that average in that they sound detailed and crisp, but a bit thin, because when these entry-level streaming DACs are set against the backdrop of all streaming DACs, their lack of body, tonal color, and rhythmic drive are laid bare. It's easy to hear it. Now, fortunately, we gain far more from these DACs software smarts than we lose from any hardware shortfall. But we have to ask, what can we do to improve the sound quality situation? Well, we can add an external DAC, but we probably don't want to spend more on an external DAC than we spent on the WiiM or the Eversolo in the first place. And one external DAC option is the K11 R2R from FiiO. It's a CD-sized metal box with a rubber base that prevents it mostly from sliding around. And the illuminated top plate can be color swapped, it can be dimmed, or it can be turned off completely using the unit's fairly rudimentary menu system. So we press the volume knob to activate that menu system, and then we turn it to move through the various menu options, and then we press and turn and press and turn. And the small knob feel here is nothing to get excited about. Now, the K11 has 3 digital inputs on its back panel: USB-C, Toslink and coax. And I connected it to a MacBook Pro via USB to use it as a DAC and a headphone amplifier. And FiiO is keen to point out that the op-amp based headphone amplifier inside the K11 is fully balanced and I think fully differential. Now, on the front panel, there are 2 headphone sockets. There's a 1/4-inch single-ended and a balanced 4.4. And the 1/4-inch single-ended socket offers more than enough gain and power to drive the Meze 105 AER, and nicely so. Now, that's with the lowest of the K11's 3 gain settings, which are selectable via the aforementioned menu system. And on hearing the Meze play loud enough, there's not much to separate the K11 from a 2021 M1 MacBook Pro and its 3.5mm headphone socket. But as experienced headphone listeners will tell you, a headphone's sound quality isn't only about how loud it can play. So for example, the FiiO doesn't draw player outlines as crisply as the MacBook Pro. Neither does it draw them as cleanly as the headphone output on the front of the WiiM Ultra DAC. But, and this is a big but, listening to the 2025 remaster of Talking Heads' more songs about buildings and food, the K11 sounds fuller in the mid-range to lend more chest to male vocals, and it's more relaxed with hi-hats and rhythm guitar strikes. Now, what about using a different, more demanding headphone? So FiiO's FT3 is a 350 ohm model that's thirstier than the Meze. So I bumped the gain setting to medium and moved the FT3's connection point to the K11's balanced 4.4mm socket. And according to FiiO's own spec sheet, balanced operation multiplies the output power by a factor of 3 for a maximum of 1.3 watts into 32 ohms. And the MacBook Pro's single-ended headphone socket has no issue whatsoever with the FT3, but the K11 comes on as more effortless with macro dynamics. That's the big swings in music, the big changes. And it better communicates the rhythmic drive found at the core of LSG's Tech Trance, which I've not played for years. And perhaps more obviously, the FiiO box doesn't crisp fry the leading edges of high frequency transients as much as the MacBook Pro, or for that matter, the WiiM Ultra DAC. So in this sense, the WiiM's and the MacBook Pro's headphone outputs are both peas from the same pod. However, if I were to be super picky, I might grumble that the K11's sub-bass kick is a little bit light. Now, none of these differences is night and day. Nothing is destroying anything else. That's absurd, especially when we're talking about DACs, because the differences between DACs are considerably smaller than those heard between amplifiers, loudspeakers, and especially rooms. And I think it's worth pointing out as well that this budget FiiO DAC worked its magic on me slowly. I had it on my desk upstairs for almost 5 months before reaching a tipping point of not wanting to go back to the MacBook Pro's headphone output when listening to music. Now, for video editing and YouTube talking heads, the MacBook Pro remains perfectly serviceable, especially with the Meze. But with music, yeah, I want to go back to the FiiO DAC. Now, the differences heard between the K11 and the MacBook Pro, and for that matter the WiiM Ultra, might be because the FT3 get more power from FiiO's headphone amplifier than from Apple's. Alternatively, and just as likely, those differences might come down to the FiiO's DAC architecture. So this is the part of the circuit that converts the incoming digital signal to the outgoing analog signal. Now, the K11 doing time here is not the Cirrus Logic version. There are 2 versions of this DAC. This is not the Cirrus Logic version. It's the R2R version, whose DAC circuit harks back to the CD players of the late 80s and early 90s. And that's before Delta Sigma DAC chips became the more popular choice among hi-fi manufacturers. And those Delta Sigma chips took over because in the main, those kinds of DACs were, and still are, I think, cheaper to implement. And they are what we find in the MacBook Pro and the WiiM Ultra DAC. So the WiiM's converter runs on an ES9038Q2M chip from ESS Labs, and in many other devices, including many of those made by FiiO themselves, we find Delta Sigma DAC chips from the likes of Cirrus Logic and AKM. So what's the difference between Delta Sigma and R2R? Now, my understanding of this tops out pretty quickly, but essentially R2R DACs use resistor ladders to process each sample as it is. So every sample corresponds to a voltage value that activates some of those resistors to set the sort of height of the audio waveform at any given slice in time. So with CD quality audio, we get 44,100 samples or time slices per second. Now, Delta Sigma DACs don't work as directly as far as I understand it. They pre-process the digital signal by upping the sample rate into the megahertz and reducing the bit depth to 1, 2, or maybe even 3 bits before decoding it to analog. Now, that's not to say that all R2R DACs are superior to all Delta Sigma designs. That's preposterous. A DA converter is more than its decoder chip or chips. The quality of the power supply and the quality of the output stage both impact sound quality just as much as the choice of decoder silicon. And I should also add that the K11 R2R is not the first R2R DAC to land in this price zone. That honor goes, I think, to the K-In RU6 dongle DAC, which hit the market in 2021 at, I think, it sold for €299. However, the FiiO is one of the most affordable R2R DACs to date. So now we might ask, how does the K11 sound next to the WiiM Ultra? So I side-by-side compared the two by connecting the WiiM's coaxial output to the FiiO's coaxial input. And I also changed the K11's output mode to line out by double pressing the volume wheel. And then I connected each DAC's line level RCA outputs in turn to a T+A Symphonia integrated using AudioQuest's GoldenGate RCA interconnect. And I performed a day of quickfire side-by-side comparisons before settling in to change them over every 2 or 3 days. And I think at some point I moved the coax connection over to Toslink just to sort of verify my findings. And working as a DAC only, so no headphone amplifier involved, I would call the K11's sound smooth, rich, and a little bit hooded. It's more hot chocolate than hot coffee. So the FiiO isn't as crystal clear or as airy sounding as the WiiM, but it's not as insistent in the uppermost treble either. So the FiiO favors, I would say, tone and texture, whereas the WiiM is stronger with clarity, layer separation, and transient bite. But again, these differences are not night and day. They are one type of light bulb versus another type of light bulb. So the FiiO is closest to an old school incandescent bulb and the WiiM is closest to an LED. So you pick which one you prefer. Now, most importantly for my tastes, the FiiO isn't as lean or as dynamically stunted as the WiiM. But if you like the idea of the FiiO sound, but wish it were a little bit better defined with player outlines, we can engage what's called OS or oversampling mode from the menu system. So instead of decoding each sample as is, oversampling mode or OS mode upsamples all incoming signals to 384 kilohertz before sending that audio stream to the resistor ladder decoder. Although I'm not sure how a resistor ladder can decode 384 kilohertz, and if you know, let us know in the comment section below, but please do so with sort of a beginner's angle because lots of people will be reading this. Now, OS mode pushes the K11 sound a little bit closer to the WiiM's, but not by much, and I still much prefer the NOS or NOS mode's more easeful demeanor because it makes me want to listen to music for longer. So putting the WiiM Ultra DAC with the FiiO K11 R2R means we get the full functionality of the WiiM, but also, I guess, the more tonally and rhythmically satisfying sound of the FiiO. So, in other words, the best of both worlds, and I think a win for anybody already in possession of a sufficiently bright sounding hi-fi system or a pair of headphones that already deliver enough, top-end spice. Now comes the kicker, because if you don't want or don't need a touchscreen, you can drop the WiiM streaming transport back to a Pro or a Pro Plus. So this allows you to pick up AirPlay support and run WiiM's TV OS app if you have an Apple TV for a much larger now playing screen. And you'll have a more physically compact solution that delivers far superior headphone drive and for the same money as the WiiM Ultra alone. Now, I didn't do this. I bought FiiO's SR11 streaming transport because it mirrors the K11's form factor and it feels sturdier and more solid than the WiiM Mini or the Pro or the Pro Plus. But the SR11 comes with a compromise that it only does Apple AirPlay and Roon Ready, and that's it. But it doesn't really matter to me because Roon Ready is pretty much all I use when listening to streaming music at home. So I use the Tidal app to build a playlist of 10 songs for this review, but I played those 10 songs via Roon. And that's because both the WiiM Ultra and the FiiO SR11 are what's known as Roon Ready, in that they can receive streams from Roon. And because you can log into Tidal from within Roon, this has Roon seamlessly blend Tidal's library with your own local library of stored files. And I think that's pretty neat. And I would like to thank Roon for sponsoring this video. Anyway, that's all from me for today. Like and subscribe as appropriate, and feel free to hit us up on Patreon, where you'll find playlists for every video that we've made since 2021 or 2020, and also some behind the scenes coverage. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. Okay, let's round out this video with a quick run through my Tidal/Roon playlist, the songs that I used for this review, and some of them I've mentioned in this video. So first of all, we have the Big Country, but this is the alternative version from the extra tracks on the new remaster of Talking Heads' More Songs About Buildings and Food. Then we've got that LSG track that I mentioned. That's Fragile Part 2 short mix. It's not actually short, it's about 8 or 9 minutes, I think. That's just been remastered by Oliver Lieb. Lieb has been remastering the LSG catalogue for going on 10 years already, so he's just put this one out, so it's quite a long time. I love LSG. In fact, LSG is the only trance music that I really like. I hated trance in the 90s. I'm still not a fan, but LSG, I don't know why they get a pass for me. I think it's because it's more techno, or it's just as much techno as it is trance. Anyway, moving on, we've got Sunrise from New Order. That's from Low Life. That's a heavily, I guess, synth sounding track. It's very moody. It's a very sort of winter sounding track. I love that. And then next to that is Jack the Ripper from Morrissey, which is easily his best B-side. What was that the B-side of? I think it was Certain People I Know. I think it was that single. But that comes from the HMV Parlophone singles box set, which is easy to get. It's, even if you want to buy a physical copy, it's very easy to get. Then there's a track by Prome called Bites Their Tongue. Prome I don't know whether he's still going. I think he is. An IDM outfit from this, in this case, from the early noughties. I didn't think that they could put a foot wrong in the early noughties Prome, and I absolutely didn't. I say they, it's a he. And this, it's sort of very crunchy, home listening electronica. I remember first listening to that when I went to Japan one time, thinking this is just the perfect synergy of my surroundings and music. After that, I added Neighborhood Threat by David Bowie, which is from one of his worst albums, which is Tonight. And I think Neighborhood Threat was a song he wrote for Iggy Pop back in the late 70s. This version is typically 80s, but it's not terrible. It's easily one of the better tracks on Tonight. And then I've got a song called Nautical Dub. It's not a song, it's a track from a dub techno glitch outfit called Porto Rix. I don't know much about those, but I do know that it was originally released on, I'm going to forget the name of the label now, Rhythm and Sound, is that right? No, Chain Reaction. It was on Chain Reaction. But then it was reissued again, I think a few years ago, and you can get a vinyl copy and a CD copy pretty easily. Then I've got a Björk track called Hunter, but this is not the normal version of Hunter. It's a remix, even though it's not labeled as such. And then I've got Fen Violet from, I think, the last Underworld album. and that features somebody called Katama. I don't know who that is, but it's a big sort of stonking, I guess you'd call it Italian house piano, but kind of, it's a lot more serious than that. It sounds a lot more major keyed than that. And then lastly, a track that I listened to no end a few years ago. It's called, well, there's 2 tracks in one. It's called Claustro State Forest. It comes from Burial. If you can get the compilation of all the Burial tracks, I think it was called 2010 to 2020 or something like that. It's either a 2 or 3 CD box, but you can get it on streaming services. And he sequenced it so that it really builds from very, very slow ambient. It's well worth a listen. Very, very cool. And yeah, that rounds out the audition music that I used to assess the K11 R2R from FiiO.